The central question dominating global security is not if the war in Ukraine will end, but how. The only realistic path to concluding the active phase of this conflict is through a strategy of direct coercion, compelling Vladimir Putin to accept a ceasefire by making the cost of continued aggression financially and militarily unbearable. This is the scenario that the shifting geopolitical landscape has made both necessary and probable. This is FPV Explainer, where we break down the most fascinating stories in drone warfare. If you're enjoying this deep dive, hit the like button, subscribe, and drop a comment telling us what topic you want to see next. Your feedback shapes our future videos and keeps us bringing you clear, detailed analysis from the front lines. Also, please watch this video to the very end, even if you play it in the background without sound, as your continuous viewing is critical to help promote the truth about the war. The strategic objective here is not to achieve a lasting peace, which is politically impossible while the current regime remains in power, but to enforce an immediate cessation of active hostilities along the line of contact. This goal is achieved by overwhelming the enemy's decision-making process. Putin, who operates from a position of strategic endurance, must be convinced that his core strategy, to simply outlast Ukraine and its allies, is fundamentally bankrupt. This requires the American president to use his considerable political and economic leverage to create a set of conditions for Russia that are so detrimental that continuing the war is a catastrophic, self-destructive choice. This means accelerating the financial strangulation of the Russian state, using sanctions to sever the oil revenue streams that fund the war, and utilizing intelligence to expose and block the shadow fleet and other illicit financial channels. The continuation of the war must be linked directly to the rapid depletion of the Russian budget. Concurrently, the U.S. must guarantee that Ukraine's military strength remains robust, providing advanced weaponry and detailed intelligence for deep strikes. This ensures that the military cost of fighting, the manpower and equipment consumed daily, exceed any possible gain. The American president's greatest tool is his unpredictability. He must apply the pressure necessary to prove that his own political will is now firmly aligned against the continuation of the war. This pressure is the ultimatum itself. The failure to accept a ceasefire will lead to immediate, massive, and irreversible escalation, including further sanctions, weapons transfers, and the dismantling of Russia's economic lifelines. This scenario is the only viable path to halting the bloodshed now. While a ceasefire carries the risk of a renewed conflict in the future, it is a necessary first step. The alternative, a slow, grinding war of attrition, guarantees more human loss and a further systemic collapse of Russia that threatens regional stability. By enforcing a ceasefire, the democratic world buys itself time to fully rearm Ukraine and integrate it into the European security architecture, ensuring that any future Russian aggression is met with overwhelming force. The goal is to prove to Putin definitively that the time for self-exhausting war is over.
Can a piece of paper, a U.S. policy memo, be more destructive to the Russian war effort than 1,000 artillery rounds? The answer is a resounding yes. The second vital element of the coercion strategy involves a synchronized double strike, the immediate lifting of all political restrictions on intelligence sharing, coupled with the looming threat of transferring the Tomahawk cruise missile. This combination is designed to dismantle Russia's strategic sanctuary and prove that its economic heartland is now decisively in the crosshairs. The critical phase of this offensive has already begun with the political decision to remove the American Red Line. For 2 years, the U.S. self-imposed a policy that restricted Ukraine from using its intelligence and long-range weapons against vital military and energy targets deep inside Russia. That era of restraint is over. The US has strategically eliminated this crucial diplomatic shield, a move confirmed by officials stating that unrestricted zones no longer exist. This is the moment American intelligence capabilities were transformed into a direct enabling weapon for the Ukrainian forces. This political authorization immediately enables the intelligence weapon. The US must now, and is already doing so, actively provide Ukraine with the highly detailed, actionable reconnaissance data required to defeat Russia's air defenses. This is not basic satellite imagery. It is granular intelligence on the real-time movement and vulnerabilities of mobile Russian air defense systems, such as the S-400s and Buk batteries. This information allows Ukrainian planners to optimize their drone and missile flight paths, guiding them around the strongest points of Russian radar coverage to ensure a much higher rate of successful penetration. This relentless exposure of Russian defense vulnerabilities is the strategic cost of the Kremlin's arrogance. This continuous intelligence support is the linchpin of the economic war, the kinetic sanctions campaign. The US and its allies must intensify this effort to systematically destroy the economic base that funds the conflict. The intelligence weapon is necessary to repeatedly hit and damage Russia's most vulnerable assets, oil refineries, and thermal power plants. This strategy is designed to inflict financial pain that accelerates the collapse of the Russian budget and cripples the domestic fuel supply chain, turning a battlefield war into an internal economic crisis. The escalation must be reinforced by the ultimate symbolic and military threat, the potential transfer of the Tomahawk cruise missile. This weapon is tied directly to the strategic outcome. The Tomahawk, with its confirmed range of up to 2,500 kilometers, 1,550 miles, and high precision, changes the entire defensive calculus. Its threat alone forces the Russian military to divert its most advanced and scarce air defense assets away from the front lines to protect static, industrial targets deep within Russia. This massive defensive dispersion, the Tomahawk ultimatum, is an immense military and financial drain, compromising the viability of the entire Russian war effort in Ukraine. The message is simple. By continuing the war, Russia risks the total dismantling of its vital infrastructure. The only way to guarantee a complete and lasting ceasefire is to make the cost of continued fighting so catastrophic that the political decision to surrender becomes inevitable. The double strike, intelligence-enabled economic warfare, reinforced by the threat of decisive, long-range conventional weapons, is the strategy to deliver that final, unanswerable blow.
Can a dictator continue a massive multi-year war when his sole source of revenue is cut off and his wealth is seized? The answer, now being delivered by the American administration, is a resounding no. The third pillar of the coercion strategy is the financial chokehold, a complex, global effort to accelerate the economic collapse of the Russian state by weaponizing frozen assets and systematically dismantling Moscow's last remaining revenue streams. The most critical factor in this offensive is the consolidation of Western financial power. The US administration must move decisively to unify the financial resources of the entire democratic world, pushing beyond traditional sanctions and toward active resource utilization. This means ending the agonizing, years-long debate over frozen Russian assets, which exceed $300 billion. The ultimate goal is to legally and financially maneuver these funds or the interest generated by them into the hands of Kyiv. This shift from passively freezing funds to actively deploying them for the defense of Ukraine is a critical step. It serves not only as a massive, stable source of long-term financing for Ukraine's military and state needs, but also as a powerful psychological blow to the Kremlin, demonstrating that the cost of aggression is payable directly from Moscow's seized wealth. This active financial strategy is coupled with the aggressive dismantling of Russia's remaining oil markets.
The American president has rightly targeted the primary financial enablers of the war, India and China. These nations became the indispensable buyers of Russian crude after Europe closed its doors, providing the financial lifeline for the military budget. The U.S. strategy must be a sustained, multi-pronged financial and diplomatic assault to sever these last connections. First, coercing the buyers. The diplomatic pressure on India must continue to be ruthless and effective. India's state and private refineries, which fear being cut off from the critical U.S. financial and technological ecosystem, have already begun to signal a reduction in Russian oil imports. This policy must be amplified to compel New Delhi to seek alternative suppliers, effectively closing one of the largest remaining markets for Russian crude. The pressure must then shift fully to China, leveraging the threat of massive tariffs and secondary sanctions to ensure Beijing is compelled to drastically reduce its consumption of discounted Russian oil and gas. Second, the shadow fleet blockade. The physical mechanism by which Russia evades sanctions, the massive, vulnerable fleet of aging tankers, must be completely neutralized. The recent seizure of Russian-linked tankers by European navies is a proof of concept. This must become a systematic maritime blockade where Western intelligence and naval power are used to actively track, interdict, and seize vessels that violate sanctions and pose environmental hazards. This action will increase the cost, risk, and insurance premium for transporting Russian oil to commercially unviable levels, guaranteeing that Russia's profit margin from its remaining oil exports collapses. The ultimate aim of this financial chokehold is to present Putin with an unresolvable financial contradiction. The immense spending required for the war, the vast salary bill, the need to replenish equipment, and the defense against Ukraine's deep strikes is colliding with a systematically diminishing revenue stream. By seizing the assets, blocking the buyers, and dismantling the logistics, the democratic world guarantees that the continuation of the war is financially impossible. This systemic, global financial pressure is the most critical factor accelerating Russia's final, inevitable defeat.
Can the West truly ensure its own long-term security by transferring military technology to a non-NATO partner? The answer, dictated by the strategic realities of the Ukrainian battlefield, is a resounding and emphatic yes. The fourth vital component of the strategy to end the war on Kyiv's terms is a massive structural commitment to transforming Ukraine into the primary defense, industrial, and tactical engine of Europe. This is not an act of benevolence. It is a strategic necessity that directly benefits the security interests of every NATO member. The core of this doctrine is simple. The Ukrainian armed forces are now the most experienced, battle-hardened military force in Europe, possessing irreplaceable knowledge in the only war that matters: modern warfare defined by drones, electronic warfare, and deep strike capabilities. This expertise is a strategic asset for the West. Therefore, the direct financing and sale of advanced weaponry to Ukraine must be viewed not as a charitable donation, but as a long-term strategic investment in Europe's own defense industrial base. This strategy is being materialized through massive, unprecedented agreements. The proposed $90 billion arms procurement deal and the agreement to establish joint drone and defense manufacturing are not about depleting U.S. stockpiles. They are about guaranteeing Ukraine's future self-sufficiency and integrating its wartime innovation into the Western DIB. Ukraine has achieved global dominance in the low-cost, high-volume drone warfare that the West has so tragically neglected. By partnering with Ukraine, the US and European DIBs gain instant access to battle-tested design, rapid prototyping, and the kind of organizational agility that bypasses bureaucratic inertia. This strategic integration ensures that the next generation of European defense systems, the FPV kamikazes, the counter-drone systems, and the battlefield AI, will be developed at the speed of war, not the speed of peacetime bureaucracy. This investment in Ukrainian strength directly serves the primary goal of deterrence. The military-political dynamic is clear. The stronger Ukraine becomes, the less Vladimir Putin believes he can win. The American president, driven by a political instinct that respects only visible strength, will continue to escalate the pressure on the Kremlin as long as Ukraine continues to demonstrate its ability to inflict crippling costs on the Russian military. Every Western long-range missile, every piece of advanced air defense, and every drone manufactured in Kyiv is a factor that shifts the Kremlin's core calculation away from potential victory and toward inevitable defeat. The goal is to make the Ukrainian military so formidable that the Russian high command, which is already struggling with a crippling manpower crisis, concludes that any renewed aggression is guaranteed to fail. The only way to guarantee a durable ceasefire and prevent future Russian aggression is to ensure that the cost of violating that ceasefire is too high. The shield of Europe, the unified, technologically superior defense of the continent, is currently being forged in Ukrainian factories and trenches. The strategic necessity is to treat Ukraine as the eastern bulwark of NATO, providing it with the resources to achieve a military victory that is also a direct security victory for all of Europe.
Does the path to peace run through prolonged diplomatic compromise or through an immediate, overwhelming display of military and financial power? The answer to this question defines the final critical choice facing the democratic world, and it dictates the only terms under which the conflict will end. The war in Ukraine is approaching a strategic bifurcation point. It will either be suspended now on the current line of contact, or it will continue for years, escalating and risking a catastrophic expansion into NATO territory. The strategy of the Russian leadership is predicated on this very choice. Vladimir Putin is waging a war of endurance, convinced that the democratic world will tire, fracture, and ultimately abandon Kyiv. His political logic is simple. As long as a ceasefire is perpetually offered, he has no reason to hurry. He will continue the war, hoping that with every passing month, Ukraine's resources will dwindle, Western political will collapse, and the terms of his eventual victory will improve. The continuation of the war is thus the path of least resistance for the Kremlin. The only way to break this destructive strategic inertia is through the consolidation of pressure and decisive force. This is where the political leverage of the American administration becomes paramount. The president must choose to abandon the costly and time-wasting role of the neutral mediator and fully embrace the strategy of coercion. This means transforming the current economic and military threats into unavoidable, immediate costs for the Russian state. The argument is that the cost of not agreeing to a ceasefire must immediately and demonstrably outweigh the cost of agreeing to one. The full force of the global financial chokehold must be applied. The immediate finalization of the Shadow Fleet blockade, the aggressive use of sanctions to deprive Moscow of its oil revenues, and the decisive allocation of long-range weaponry, like the Tomahawk, to Ukraine. This strategy ensures that the continuation of the war guarantees only an accelerated internal collapse, financial ruin, military exposure, and an unmanageable crisis of state sovereignty. The American president holds the key to the timeline. By choosing to apply this overwhelming force, his administration can accelerate the war's conclusion to the near future, potentially within months, forcing Putin to accept a ceasefire to save the structural integrity of his own regime.
This action is the only way to prevent the conflict from settling into the protracted, bloody grind that is the best-case scenario for Moscow. Conversely, any hesitation, any return to ambiguous statements, or any softening of the economic chokehold will be read instantly by the Kremlin as a green light to continue. The consequence of prolonged war is severe. It risks draining Europe's resources, fueling geopolitical instability, and dramatically increasing the risk of a Russian provocation against a NATO frontline state like the Baltics, a move designed to finally shatter the alliance. The choice is clear. The American administration must leverage its power now to enforce a rapid suspension of the conflict, or accept the risk of a far larger, far longer war that threatens the core of global security. The moment for ambiguity is over. The time for decisive force is now.